What if I told you that the story of Layne Staley's life is not what it seems? We'll reveal the 20 facts regarding the tragic decline of famed Alice in Chains vocalist Layne Staley. We'll look at his life's highs and lows and the influence he had on the music business, from his ascent to stardom to his untimely demise. So fasten your seatbelts and prepare to uncover the true Layne Staley in a manner you've never seen before. 20. April 5 deaths. Two grunge icons, Kurt Cobain of Nirvana, 1994, and Layne Staley of Alice in Chains, 2002, coincidentally passed away on April 5. Alice in Chains was never formally abandoned by Staley. However, Staley's addiction caused him to withdraw, and as time went on, Staley would, in Neil Young's words, fade away in the public's perception. Jerry Cantrell, the guitarist and backup vocalist, started a solo career, but Alice in Chains didn't release any music until years after Staley passed away. Some fans thought the singer would pass away eventually. As he neared death, Staley stayed out of the spotlight and seldom left his house. 2 weeks after overdosing, on April 19, 2002, he was discovered dead in his condominium. When Staley's parents learned that he was no longer making withdrawals from his bank account, they were frightened. After phoning the police, they broke into his house and discovered his body. Fans of Alice in Chains were obviously devastated by Staley's passing, yet despite all of his contributions to grunge music, Staley's passing received much less media coverage than Kurt Cobain's. This is a fact that has been noted by many fans of Alice in Chains and Staley himself. Some believe he burnt out and vanished, while others saw it as a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's ironic because Cobain also struggled with heroin addiction, yet many people who saw Kurt as a tragic person or a victim also labeled Staley as a hopeless junkie. This is a sad reflection of how society views addiction and mental health issues. It's important to remember that Staley was more than just his addiction. He was a talented musician who touched the hearts of many with his music. Staley's music continues to carry on his legacy even in the absence of media attention. New generations of musicians are still motivated by his distinctive voice and compositions. It is evidence of his skill and the influence he had on the music business. 19. He came from a broken home. Layne Staley, like many rock artists, wasn't raised in the most stable or happy circumstances. Adriana Rubio's Layne Staley, Angry Chair, states that his biological father, Philip Staley, disappeared soon after he was born in 1967, described in Metal Sucks. At one point, Staley was even told that his old man had died, which was false information. He is reported in the book as saying, "I got a call saying that my dad had died, but my family always knew he was around doing all kinds of drugs." Not exactly a great beginning to the relationship. Since that call, I always wondered, where's my dad? I felt so sad for him and I missed him. He dropped out of my life for 15 years. According to David DeSola, Staley was reared by his mother, Nancy McCallum, and her second husband, Jim Elmer, whom she met at a Christmas party for mutual friends for most of his early years. Luckily for Staley, Elmer seemed like a relatively good stepdad and even had a big influence in getting the young Staley interested in music. According to the report, Staley saw Elton John for the first time in October 1975 after checking him out with Jim. When Layne Staley was 7 years old, his parents divorced, and it had a profound effect on him. His father turned into a strong drug user and completely disappeared from his life, which he described as turning his boyhood into a nightmare. Staley hypothesized that these encounters might have contributed to his own drug addiction in the future. 18. Mike Starr was the last person to see Staley alive. The demise of Layne Staley was devastating for both his followers and the music industry itself.
When we left the stage, we all agreed that this is the most awesome crowd.
His greatest friend and bandmate, Mike Starr, who was also a former bassist of Alice in Chains, never recovered from the loss. He was the last person to see him alive. Despite realizing how ill Staley was, he did not dial 911 during this most recent encounter. Starr wanted him to get medical attention, but Staley refused, and they battled about it. After Starr left, Staley passed away that same day. Starr's personal struggles with alcoholism and addiction may have contributed to his death 9 years later as a result of his remorse about this incident. Even after Staley's mother officially pardoned him, he was never free of guilt. 17. Layne Staley refused medical attention the day before he died. The day before Layne Staley passed away, which happened to be Mike Starr's birthday, the original Alice in Chains bassist visited the singer at his University District apartment. The two had a mixed relationship. According to David DeSola's book, Layne became enraged with Mike for taking benzodiazepines, which led to a fight. The most heartbreaking aspect of this may have been the bassist's attempt to call 911 for his friend after becoming concerned about Staley's look, but the singer turned him down. On a Loveline episode in February 2010, Mike stated, "I was with him all that day on my birthday trying to keep him alive. I even asked him if I could call 911, and he said that if I did, he'd never talk to me again. Of course, I didn't know he was going to die, or I would have called 911 anyways. I'd much rather have him alive and not talking to me than to have lost such a great human being, a great friend, and just a great person." What a great person he was. 16. Layne would sometimes spend weeks without contacting anyone. As Layne's addictions deepened, he would go missing for weeks at a time with no word from anyone. Fans continued to whisper that Staley was in trouble, and even though he briefly got back together and went on tour in 1995, things were falling apart and Staley was unable to conceal his illness. He fell deeper into sadness after Demry Laura Parrott, his former fiancée, passed away from an infection brought on by drugs. In 1996, Staley gave his last Alice in Chains performance. By 2002, reaching Staley was getting more and more difficult. His physical health issues, which included nausea, vomiting, agony, and liver failure, consumed him so much that he spent weeks hiding out in his Seattle condo and wouldn't answer the door or the phone. He frequently went weeks without communicating, and everyone gave up on trying to pull him off the course he was on. He slept, watched TV, and played computer games throughout his final days alone. He made the following statement in a 1996 Rolling Stone interview. "Drugs worked for me for years, and now they're turning against me. Now I'm walking through hell." 15. Layne Staley was raised Christian Scientist but came to distrust religion. In 2015, Staley's mother, Nancy McCallum, told Alternative Nation, "I think people would be surprised that Staley was raised in the Christian Science Sunday School for 20 years. They asked if he believed in God, and I thought, oh, for heaven's sake, listen to his music. Of course he did." However, she continues by stating that her deceased child was shocked to find that God isn't going to dig you out of every tunnel that you put yourself into. It's difficult to say if Staley would concur with his mother's opinion. In 1996, he told Rolling Stone, "I don't believe in eternal damnation for anyone. I believe that there's a wonderful place to go after this life. I'm not into religion, but I have a good grasp on my spirituality. I just believe that I'm not the greatest power on this earth. I didn't create myself because I would have done a hell of a better job." If you're sensing some animosity at the end there, you're not incorrect. In this July 19, 1999 Alice in Chains interview with Rockline, Staley claims that he wrote Get Born Again as a response to what he perceived as religious hypocrisy. While Staley obviously retained some of the lessons from his religious upbringing, he had no desire to engage with the structures it had forced him into. 14. He was private about his addiction. When he returned from a trip to the bathroom, wrote John Wiederhorn for Rolling Stone, his sleeves were unbuttoned, exposing what appear to be red, round puncture marks from the wrist to the knuckles of the left hand. And as anyone who knows anything about IV drugs can tell you, the veins in the hand are used only after all the other veins have been tapped out. Yes, by the time this 1995 story titled Alice in Chains Layne Staley, Needle and Damage Done appeared, Staley had been suffering from heroin addiction for years. Even still, Staley became combative when asked about his habit, fearing it would come to define him, despite its obviousness.
Still isn't clear about what doing drugs does? This is your brain. This is drugs.
When I haven't talked to anybody in years, and every article I see is dope this, junkie that, whiskey this, that ain't my title. My bad habits aren't my title. My strengths and my talent are my title, he stated. But personal humiliation was unrelated to that defensiveness. His addiction had turned from a delightful hobby to a life-threatening burden, and he argued that he wanted to downplay it, fearing that showing it out to followers might encourage drug use. When I tried drugs, they were great, and they worked for me for years, he stated. And now they're turning against me, and now I'm walking through hell, and this sucks. I didn't want my fans to think that heroin was cool. 13. Layne Staley became a recluse in his final years. Layne Staley lived a solitary life in his last years, surrounded only by narcotics, according to a transcript of a Rolling Stone piece from 2002. The tale of his downfall started on July 3, 1996, when Staley exited the stage after Kiss's warm-up performance. He would never play another show with Alice in Chains. Later that year, Staley lost his 27-year-old ex-girlfriend, Demra Parrott, to a heroin overdose, according to sources close to the band. His life force left him with her. The musician was supposedly withering away in his Seattle apartment, painting, playing video games, and using drugs to kill time while sightings of him grew fewer and farther between. There were also false tales that Staley shot himself and had gangrene, necessitating the amputation of fingers to a full arm. It was also debatable if he continued to communicate with his fellow musicians. According to the report, Jerry Cantrell told Kerrang! He and the other men from Alice used to hang out with Staley at his house a lot in 1998, playing video games and having a great time. Drummer Sean Kinney, however, presented a different picture a year later, saying, "I talk to Layne, but we don't hang out. I don't live his lifestyle, so his house isn't the healthiest place to be around. I don't need any help to get annihilated." Many people surrounding Layne Staley perceived him as a reclusive and sorrowful person, as his heroin addiction grew more and more intense. Yet the last time his family saw him alive, he was actually rather amiable and lighthearted. His mother Nancy stated in a Seattle Times story on Staley that her last recollection of her son was him holding his nephew in February 2002 when they were visiting his relatives. "I saw Layne on Thanksgiving of '01 and again just around Valentine's Day when he came to see his sister's new baby. The last time I saw Layne, and the last picture we have of him, is holding baby Oscar." Nancy makes a special point of stating that even though her son had turned inward, he remained reachable for those who were close to him. He was never far from the love of his family and friends, who filled his answering machine and mailbox with messages and letters. Just because he was isolated doesn't mean we didn't have sweet moments with him. 12. He hallucinated the ghost of his ex-girlfriend. According to a 2002 Rolling Stone story, Layne Staley's descent into a solitary, drug-fueled existence that finally took his own life was sparked in part by the passing of his ex-girlfriend, Demra Parrott. According to Alice in Chains, The Untold Story, the two fell in love right away when they first met in 1988, just before Alice in Chains became well known. They remained close until 1994 when they finally broke up. Parrott also used drugs heavily. On October 29, 1996, she overdosed and died. Even though they were no longer together, Staley's reaction to the news was obviously devastating. According to the book, Mike Starr, the former bassist for Alice, paid Staley a visit the day before the singer passed away. The two were purportedly viewing a program called Crossing Over, which centers on a psychic medium who assists in reuniting surviving family members with their departed loved ones. Demra was here last night, according to reports of Staley. Later that day, Starr departed his apartment with Staley saying, "I don't give a fuck if you fucking believe me or not, dude. I'm telling you, Demer was here. He would never be seen alive by anyone again." In any case, Demer's mother accepts Staley's account, even if it is evident that his drug use had an impact on him. Whether you believe it or not, it's a hauntingly beautiful narrative, and she says her daughter had come to be there with Layne as he's doing his transition. And it's somewhat consoling to think that at the very least, Staley might not have thought he was alone when it was all over. 11. Gaming had become a way for Layne Staley to lose himself. It was widely known that Layne Staley loved video games and would frequently vanish to play them when Alice in Chains was recording. Tad Doyle of the influential Seattle band Tad writes in his book Grunge is Dead that his mother Nancy called him a video game freak, and that Alice in Chains would have his band on their tour bus playing video games and listening to music. But like a lot of the things that appeared to bring him joy, video gaming turned into an escape for Staley, a means of focusing on something that didn't strain his feelings too much. In a Rolling Stone feature on the band, Staley bows out to play video games on his portable Sega system, occurring during Alice in Chains' game of Whirly Ball, a hybrid of basketball, lacrosse, and bumper cars, which only rock stars can ever hope to enjoy. 10. Layne Staley didn't want anyone else using. Grunge was criticized by many outsiders who saw it as glamorizing drug use and encouraging the idea that creativity and addiction are interwoven through the lyrics and the emerging heroin chic trend of 90s fashion. However, Layne Staley's last interview discloses that he was using heroin only because he was unable to quit, not because he was doing it for pleasure. According to Staley, this fucking drug use is like the insulin a diabetic needs to survive. In part of the Blabbermouth interview, "I'm not using drugs to get high like many people think." Because of this, Staley didn't want Alice in Chains fans to think that heroin was cool, and he was appalled by how addiction had affected his life. "I never wanted the public's thumbs up about this fucking drug use," he stated. A moment before, Staley had disclosed, "My liver is not functioning and I'm throwing up all the time and shitting my pants. The pain is more than you can handle. It's the worst pain in the world. Dope sickness hurts the entire body." 9. His last show with Alice in Chains was opening for Kiss.
I don't feel there's anything objectionable about any of our songs, but I don't feel anyone else has the right to rate our songs. I mean, I'm the only...
This one is unsettling. In 1996, Stone Temple Pilots were forced to give up their opening slot beneath a newly reunited Kiss after Scott Weiland checked himself into rehab. They were eventually replaced by Alice in Chains, and after the final performance, Staley overdosed on heroin. He never performed with Alice in Chains again, and even though he recovered from the OD, the band went on hiatus. The band had always faced difficulties, but in the months leading up to the release of their self-titled album in 1995, things became even more dire. Despite their inability to sustain the album, Alice in Chains was able to muster enough strength to do a now famous set for MTV Unplugged on April 10, 1996. For a split second, it appeared as though the band may be heading into a more stable phase. In a heartbreakingly ironic turn of events, they were offered the chance to join rock superstars Kiss as the opening act for 4 dates of their reunion tour after Stone Temple Pilots had to postpone their gig because of frontman Scott Weiland's return to treatment. 8. Staley inspired Metallica's Death Magnetic album. Lyrically, Death Magnetic started as a bit of a tribute to Layne Staley and all those who've martyred themselves in the name of rock and roll, said James Hetfield, frontman of Metallica, in an interview with Guitar World magazine. Frontman of Alice in Chains, Layne Staley, died on April 5, 2002, following years of arduous drug addiction treatment that was vividly detailed in the singer's songs. While many of his fellow rock stars were happy to celebrate drug addiction and classic rock and roll excess, Staley spoke from a dark and depressing place, one of suffering and anguish rather than revelry and careless abandon. Supporters were divided, applauding the genius of his terrifyingly poetic ability, but also fearing that one of the biggest singers of the 1990s was putting himself in danger. Nevertheless, by always balancing between grunge and metal, Staley and the rest of Alice in Chains helped bring metal and grunge fans together. By the time the late 90s struck, a new breed of singers had quickly adopted a similar approach that reverberated throughout the hard rock milieu, thanks in large part to Staley's deep croon, which could become gritty and nasty at any time. Turn on the radio and you were almost guaranteed to get lost in a sea of like-minded bands that had stolen Staley's template and used it to build their own rock powerhouses. Turn to the top of the page to view 15 things you may not know about Layne Staley in remembrance of one of rock's finest singers who passed away 15 years ago. 7. Layne Staley was in poor physical shape, but his mood was good. Layne Staley lost interest in socializing and producing music with his band as his health declined. Nevertheless, although Staley appeared awful on the outside, those who saw him during the height of his addiction insisted that he was frequently the same jovial, smiling man they remembered. Layne appeared to be in a good mood even near the end of his life, according to an interview with Staley's stepfather, Jim Elmer, that was included in David De Sola's book, Alice in Chains, The Untold Story. He was smiling, he was talkative, so there's a good sign that either he was doing better or he was trying to do better. That there's a more hopeful thing as opposed to we're going to lose him in 2 days or something like that. Editor of the Seattle rock journal The Rocker, Jeff Gilbert, reported that Layne appeared to be conscious emotionally but looked terrible when he encountered him on the street near the end of his life. He looked like an 80-year-old version of himself and it was frightening. He still managed to smile. Every so often you'd see that little glimmer. 6. Last cry for help. The band Alice in Chains helped to pioneer the emerging grunge style of the 1990s, and their studio albums never failed to enthrall listeners. The band effortlessly blended heavy metal influence with the growingly popular grunge genre in their studio albums, which were heavy hitters like Facelift and Dirt, and were thick and sludgy. The band really excelled, though, in the EPs that were released in between their full-length albums. Jar of Flies distills Alice in Chains music to its melancholy essence and leaves you with nothing but a warning and the weight of your own choices. Previous Alice in Chains albums were about being bigger than life. Between Alice in Chains' second studio album, Dirt, and their third album of the same name, Jar of Flies was released. Compared to the band's previous releases, this EP is raw, exposed, and mostly acoustic-led. While songs like Man in the Box are powered by wah-wah and distortion effects, No Excuses and Don't Follow rely solely on the strength of Layne Staley's vocals and Jerry Cantrell's masterfully simple guitar work. Rotten Apple is arguably the hardest song on Jar of Flies to listen to. Mike Inez keeps you on the edge of your seat during the verses with an eerie bass line behind Staley's rhythmic vocals, even though the first chorus doesn't begin for almost 2 minutes. As Staley, Inez, and Cantrell each pull the tune in their own direction, the chorus devolves into a complete meltdown, with Jerry Cantrell's backup vocals adding to the discord. The backbeat is the only aspect of the song that seems consistent now, as the rest of the melody struggles to unravel itself and the drums collapse into a simple meter. Jar of Flies turned out to be the beginning of the end for Alice in Chains. Not long after the EP's release, the band's summer 1994 tour with Metallica was postponed due to Staley's admission to a treatment facility for his heroin addiction, which he had been battling since at least 1990.
About any of our songs, but I don't feel anyone else has the right to rate our songs. I mean, I'm the only one that has the right to rate, my album. You don't have it.
5. Layne Staley's mother was working with a rehab clinic when he died. In the 12 months preceding his demise, Layne Staley's mother, Nancy McCallum, was arguably the person closest to him. She had consistently supported her son and assisted him in pursuing addiction treatment. On the day of Staley's death, Nancy was even employed at a treatment facility. It was thanks to her involvement that the singer's body was discovered by the authorities. In an interview with the Seattle Times, Nancy stated that on the day of Layne's death, she was working at a rehab clinic's front desk. She even had a meeting scheduled with one of the supervisors to discuss how to start treating her son differently. Subsequently, she got a call from his accountant informing her that Staley had withdrawn a substantial amount of money many weeks prior and no one had heard from him since. When Staley didn't respond, Nancy hurried to his apartment and called the police. Nancy still receives letters from fans and addicts. Thus, she is still troubled by her son's addiction in many ways, but she also finds solace and prophecy in Layne's lyrics about the problem. She answered, "That's what his music was about, the life of an addict. He chose to write about it and sing about it and perform about it. It was a warning." 4. His mother is still haunted by her son's death. It's difficult enough losing a child. It must be tough to continuously be reminded of the circumstances surrounding their death when so many other people are struggling with addiction. Even more difficult, Nancy McCallum admitted to the Seattle Times that she continues to receive a deluge of emails and messages from individuals everywhere who are struggling with addiction or know someone who is. Her assistance in organizing the Layne Staley Tribute Concert, an annual celebration of Alice in Chains' musical accomplishments, is one way she has aided in the struggle. Funds are given to the Layne Staley Memorial Fund's administrator, Therapeutic Health Services. This nonprofit combats heroin addiction in the Seattle region. However, McCallum finds herself at a loss for words, simply another mourning parent whose child just so happened to become well known and impact people's lives. "I have no secret solutions," she informed the newspaper. Her son's song, she adds, should bring attention to the sickness of addiction that finally took his life. "It's heartbreaking and overwhelming and unnecessary. The opioid explosion in recent years tells me that people feel alone," she continues. "This music, Layne was writing a warning." 3. The Layne Staley Memorial Fund exists in his honor. Following his passing, Staley's mother, Nancy McCallum, established the Layne Staley Fund, a non-profit organization. She did so with the help of local drug and alcohol counselor Jamie Richards. Founded in 2002 and shut down in 2010, the fund gathered funds by hosting memorial concerts on August 21, the eve of Staley's birthday, and assisted several Seattle users in overcoming their own severe heroin addictions.
Hi, welcome to CNN Headline News. I'm Anna Hovind. The lead singer of the rock band Alice in Chains has been found dead in his Seattle home.
The memorial performances, which brought together musicians and friends to pay musical honor to Staley's life, were incredibly successful. Nick Pollock and Johnny Bacolas, two bandmates of Alice in Chains, have been featured on them. More recently, Sean Smith, My Sister's Machine, Villains of Yesterday, Gun and the Damage Done, and All Hail the Crown have been featured. Fans continue to utilize the Layne Staley Memorial Fund website as a way to honor him and his musical career even after it closed. And Mike Starr is also recalled. 2. His body wasn't found for weeks. The terrible scene that occurred on April 19 when cops broke down the door of Layne Staley's condo in Seattle's University District is described by Seattle Weekly. The singer was discovered sitting upright, surrounded by narcotics and drug-related items, cans of spray paint, used needles, and cash that had not yet been spent, all of which were lit by a flickering TV. Weeks had passed since his death, and he was still holding a full heroin syringe. According to Ultimate Classic Music, Staley actually passed away on April 5, 2002, which was 8 years to the day after fellow grunge music leader Kurt Cobain committed suicide. However, his body wasn't discovered until April 19. Friends and family who may have discovered him sooner didn't find it particularly strange that they hadn't heard from him during that time because he had been a recluse for so long. Actually, his accountants were the ones who first suspected something wasn't quite right. Diffuser complains that Staley's mother granted the police permission to break down his door when they saw the singer hadn't spent any money in an odd length of time. She was not far behind, having left work right after and sped home, swerving by 5 police cars that happily made no attempt to stop her. Then she went inside the house and sat next to her son's body, defying the police on the scene's orders to remain outside. She told the Seattle Times, "I vowed to be there for my children no matter what. I told him I was sorry this was how it turned out." 1. Staley knew his death was near. Reporter Adriano Rubio was informed by Staley in his final interview that he was aware of his limited time on Earth. He murmured, "I know I'm close to death. I spent years abusing crack and heroin. This is not how I ever wanted to finish my life. I'm aware that I have no chance. It's past due." MTV claims that the book Layne Staley, Angry Chair describes the AIC's singer's last conversation with Argentine journalist Adriana Rubio. "I know I'm dying," according to accounts of Staley. The book mentions that he had trouble breathing and was missing teeth. "I'm not doing well," declared the performer. "Don't try to talk about this to my sister Liz. She will know it sooner or later." Then, claiming that he was well past the point of shooting up for fun, he blames his heroin habit. "This fucking drug use is like the insulin a diabetic needs to survive. I'm not using drugs to get high like many people think. I know I made a big mistake when I started using this shit. The pain is more than you can handle. It's the worst pain in the world. Dope sickness hurts the entire body." Staley acknowledged that he had come to terms with the fact that the drug would eventually overcome him, but at this time he was too weak to fight on. "I never wanted to end my life this way," he said, regretting but eventually acknowledging that he had made the choice to begin abusing crack and heroin years earlier. "I know I have no chance. It's too late. Don't try to contact any AIC members. They're not my friends." Thank you for watching this video about the 20 truths about the dark descent of Layne Staley. We hope you enjoyed discovering the real Layne Staley in a way you've never seen before. The renowned Alice in Chains frontman Layne Staley was a talented musician who had a lasting impression on the grunge music industry. As fans, we can honor the memory of Layne Staley by continuing to listen to their music and sharing it with others. Rest in peace, Layne Staley. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more exciting content like this. Until next time.